The sky outside my window was still a soft blue-gray when I opened my eyes, the kind of hue that hinted at a quiet morning before the world stirred. I moved gently so I wouldn't wake Darren, though I needn't have bothered. His back was already to me, the distance between us more than physical. I stared at the curve of his shoulder under the blanket for a long second before slipping out of bed. Today was Ava's wedding day, my sister-in-law, his sister. It should have felt like a celebration, but a cold pit sat in my stomach, heavy and unwelcome. I padded to the corner of the room where I'd wrapped the gift the night before. A large, flat rectangle wrapped in navy blue paper, with twine crisscrossed like a ribbon. Inside was a painting I'd worked on for weeks, the park bench under the old oak tree in Channing Park, the spot where Miles had proposed to Ava last fall. I'd taken photos during that visit, pretending to admire the leaves while they posed for selfies. I'd wanted it to be perfect for her. A keepsake. A reminder of a moment I knew she cherished. Now I wasn't so sure it would be welcome. Downstairs, Darren stood by the coffee machine, scrolling on his phone, jaw tight, hair still damp from the shower. "Morning," I said, trying not to sound too eager for warmth. He didn't look up. "Morning," he mumbled, without inflection. Not cold, not warm, just indifferent. I swallowed and picked up the gift from the counter. "Is that the painting?" he asked, still not meeting my eyes. I nodded. "Yeah. I hope she likes it." He didn't respond. Just kept scrolling. I stared at him a moment longer, waiting for something, anything. A compliment. A thank you. A small reach toward connection. But none came. So I stepped away. The ride to the venue was silent in the kind of way that made your skin itch. Darren's parents, Elaine and Victor, sat up front in their sleek sedan, Elaine's lips pursed tightly as if keeping secrets. Victor stared ahead like he couldn't wait for the day to be over. I sat in the back with Darren, boxed in by quiet disapproval, the painting resting on my lap like a shield. No one asked what was in the box. No one asked if I was excited. No one asked anything. I stared out the window as familiar streets blurred by, fighting the urge to shrink into myself. Darren leaned against the door, practically a full foot between us, arms crossed. I wondered if he even noticed. I could still remember when he used to pull me closer in car rides, fingers brushing mine just because he wanted to touch me. Now he might as well have been in another car. Elaine broke the silence once, to ask Darren, "You have the rings, right?" He nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah, got them right here." That was it. Not a word about the ceremony. Not a word about the gift or my dress or even the weather. Just a strange, suffocating quiet that pressed on my chest. I shifted in my seat and caught Darren glancing at his watch. Like time couldn't move fast enough. I blinked away the sting behind my eyes. I wouldn't cry. Not today. Not for this. When we pulled up to the church, the driver dropped us off in a designated loop where other wedding guests milled about informal wear, chatting and laughing and adjusting corsages. Elaine was out of the car before I could say anything, brushing invisible lint from her blazer like she had more important things to deal with. Victor followed silently. Darren stepped out next, slamming the door shut behind him without even glancing back. I took a breath, hands tightening on the painting, and opened the door myself. The morning air bit at my skin, crisp and sharp. I walked slowly behind them, feeling like a ghost at someone else's celebration. Like I'd been invited out of obligation rather than welcome. I hadn't done anything wrong. At least, I didn't think I had. But there was something off. And I could feel it crawling under my skin. Like a chill that wouldn't lift, no matter how bright the day was supposed to be. I followed the others inside, clutching the painting close to my chest, and whispered a silent prayer that I was just imagining things. That this tension was nothing more than wedding nerves. But even as I stepped into the grand hall of the church and heard the soft swell of music from the string quartet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a storm that had already started brewing, one I hadn't been warned about. The sanctuary was glowing with soft candlelight and blooming white hydrangeas, but despite the beauty, I felt like I was stepping into a place where I didn't belong. As I crossed the threshold, Darren and his parents moved ahead without a word, their silhouettes blending into the crowd near the front. I paused, unsure where to go. A young usher in a crisp black suit approached me, smiling politely, his eyes scanning the small card in his hand. "Leah, right?" he asked, confirming my name with professional detachment. "Yes," I replied, trying to smile, though my nerves were coiling tighter in my chest. He turned and gestured toward the far left pews. "You'll be seated over here." I blinked, momentarily confused. "Sorry, I thought I'd be with the family section. My husband is Darren. He's Ava's brother." The usher hesitated just a fraction of a second too long, then smiled again like he hadn't heard the question. "This way, please." I followed him numbly, my heels clicking softly against the marble aisle. With each step away from the center, the warmth of the ceremony dimmed. I glanced toward the front rows, where Elaine and Victor were already seated proudly in the family pews. Darren was with them, bent over whispering something into Ava's ear, who laughed with a glittering smile. None of them looked toward me. My seat was halfway back, tucked against the wall, closer to a side door than the altar. A perfect spot if someone wanted you forgotten. I sat down slowly, carefully setting the painting at my feet, and looked around at the strangers beside me, distant guests, maybe coworkers, maybe plus ones. No one met my gaze. I folded my hands in my lap, the silence ringing louder than any hymn. As the prelude music began to swell, I tried to focus on the beauty around me. The altar was lovely, bathed in soft gold light. Ava's taste, I thought automatically. Refined, classic, expensive. It should have made me proud to be part of her family. But all I could feel was that I had been pushed to the outer edges, like I was something to be managed quietly. Like someone had made a decision to keep me out of view. I shifted in my seat, craning my neck slightly to see Darren again. He stood tall, expression unreadable, not once looking over his shoulder. I wondered if he even realized where I was sitting. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was the point. I tried to piece together a reason. Had I said something wrong at the rehearsal dinner? No. I'd hardly spoken at all, too aware of Elaine's narrowed eyes and Ava's clipped tone. Had I missed a message? Offended someone without realizing? The possibilities twisted in my brain like threads I couldn't untangle. The bridal party began to process, and polite claps and murmurs filled the air as they took their places. Ava appeared last, radiant in lace, her smile blinding as she clutched Victor's arm. The entire church turned to watch her glide down the aisle. I forced a smile too, clapping softly as she passed, though her eyes swept over the pews like she was searching for someone, and it wasn't me. I watched Darren as she reached him. He kissed her cheek, whispered something again. My stomach tightened. There had once been a time when I felt like his person, like we were each other's anchor in the noise of family and expectation. But now I sat alone, sidelined and forgotten. The ceremony began, words of love and unity echoing through the vaulted ceiling. I tried to absorb them, to let their poetry distract me, but I couldn't stop glancing at the family pews. Couldn't stop wondering why I was here and not there. And still, no one turned to look back at me. By the time they exchanged vows, I had given up pretending. I wasn't a part of this moment. Not really. I was an observer, tolerated but excluded. Like I had been marked in some invisible ink and everyone else had the key to the message. The realization was slow, like water creeping under a door, but once it touched me, it soaked everything. As the organ roared to life and Ava and Miles were pronounced husband and wife, the church stood in thunderous applause. I rose with them, clapping, smiling stiffly, performing the part. But inside, I felt like I had been quietly written out of a story I thought I was still in. And no one even noticed. The reception hall sparkled with gold accents and candlelight, every detail clearly curated for a magazine-worthy celebration. It should have felt magical, stepping into a room full of celebration and joy, but as I walked in holding the carefully wrapped painting under one arm, a strange chill clung to me like a shadow. People mingled around tall cocktail tables, glasses of champagne clinking, laughter rising and falling like waves. I scanned the crowd for Darren, hoping to find some familiarity, something to anchor me. Instead, a young woman holding a clipboard approached. "Name?" "Leah Holloway," I answered, offering a polite smile. She looked down her list and pointed across the room. Table 14, in the corner by the bar. I blinked, caught off guard. Oh, are you sure? I'm the groom's sister-in-law. Darren's wife. She didn't flinch. Just nodded. Table 14. I swallowed my confusion, thanked her, and weaved through the crowd. The tables closer to the front were already filling with the bridal party and immediate family. Elaine and Victor perched at a long, regal head table, flanked by Ava and Miles in the center. Darren sat beside his sister, laughing at something Miles had said, his smile easy and unbothered. I slowed as I passed, hoping he'd turn, maybe wave me over, but his eyes didn't even flick in my direction. He didn't see me. Or maybe he didn't want to. Table 14 was tucked into the farthest corner, practically touching the wall, half hidden behind a potted plant that stretched awkwardly toward the ceiling. I sat down, setting the painting carefully on the floor beside me. The table was half full. Harper, a woman I vaguely remembered from high school, and a few others I didn't know at all. No one greeted me with warmth. Just nods, small smiles, the kind of polite acknowledgement you give to someone you don't really expect to speak to again. I kept my gaze on the head table, still hoping that Darren would notice where I was. That he'd wave me over, maybe whisper something to his mother about the seating mistake. But nothing changed. He raised his glass for a toast with Ava, both of them laughing again. Ava looked radiant, practically glowing under the chandelier light, and Darren looked right at home. Like I wasn't missing at all. A sharp pang of humiliation crept up my throat. I sipped the water in front of me, trying to focus on the centerpiece, white roses and eucalyptus, perfect and elegant, and not on how the people I loved had deliberately put me out of sight. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. And realizing that felt like a tiny crack forming down the center of my chest. When dinner was served, the waiter brought our table plates without the ceremony I saw happening closer to the head. There were no speeches at our table, no clinking of glasses, no playful games. Just quiet conversation in awkward fragments. At one point, I caught Harper glancing at me with a look that hovered somewhere between discomfort and guilt, but when I met her gaze, she quickly looked down at her plate. I tried again, just once. To catch Darren's eye across the room. He was standing now, posing for a group photo with Ava and their parents, arms slung easily around them, his smile wide. I raised a hand, heart foolishly lifting for a second. But he didn't see me. Or worse, he did. And still turned back to Ava, laughing louder. Something inside me settled cold and low. I looked at my untouched food, then around at the strangers who didn't know my name or my story, and I wondered when I had become so invisible. When exactly had I crossed the line from family to afterthought? The music started then, and people began drifting toward the dance floor. Harper leaned over to ask if I was planning to dance. I shook my head, offering a small excuse I didn't mean. No energy. Maybe later. Truth was, I couldn't dance. Not when I felt so forgotten. Not when my own husband hadn't spoken to me all evening. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair at table 14, my dress catching slightly on the edge of the seat as I leaned forward to reach for my water glass. The air felt heavier now, the hum of conversation in the room like static buzzing in my ears. I tried not to look at the head table again, tried not to track Darren's every movement as he laughed, toasted, and leaned in to speak to Ava and Miles with easy familiarity. My world, just a few months ago, would have been up there too. Now it was clear I was no longer part of that circle. Across from me, Harper tapped her wine glass nervously, her eyes darting toward the dance floor before flicking back to me. She looked different than I remembered her in high school, more polished, less shy, but the familiar hesitation in her posture was still there. She'd been mostly quiet all night, sipping slowly, her shoulders stiff. Now, as the DJ shifted into a slower song and the couples began to pair up, she leaned closer across the table. "You probably already heard what they've been saying," she said, voice just above a whisper. I paused, my fingers tightening around my glass. "What?" Harper's eyes widened like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. Her face flushed, and she dropped her gaze, biting her lip. What have they been saying? I pressed, lowering my voice but leaning in. She looked at me, panic written across her features. I thought you knew. I needed air. Or answers. Maybe both. The walls of the reception hall felt like they were bending inward, pressing on me, making it hard to breathe. I stood, slowly, carefully, not drawing attention, and slipped away from table 14. No one noticed. Or if they did, no one cared enough to stop me. I kept close to the edges of the room, weaving through the tables as unobtrusively as possible. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear exactly, but from something worse. That rising suspicion that something was happening behind the scenes, something that involved me, but no one had the decency to just say it to my face. The hallway near the back of the venue was quieter, the music muffled by thick walls and closed doors. I followed the corridor past the restrooms and coat check, pausing near a velvet curtain that separated the catering staff's staging area from the main reception space. A flicker of voices made me freeze. She humiliated you, Ava's voice said, low but sharp, unmistakably hers. I stopped breathing. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the sound of my name, or rather, the clear implication of it, glued my feet to the floor. Let her stay in the corner, Darren replied. My Darren. His voice was tight with contempt. She doesn't deserve to be anywhere near this table. I stared at the curtain, willing it to dissolve so I could see the faces behind it, hoping this was all a terrible misunderstanding. She still doesn't know we found out, Ava whispered. My stomach dropped. I staggered back half a step, the air around me thickening like soup. What had they found out? What were they talking about? The painting, the gift I'd poured myself into. I had brought it to offer peace, to show love. But clearly, nothing I did mattered anymore. Not to them. I backed up slowly, my heartbeat now echoing in my ears. I didn't want to hear more, couldn't bear it. The words already felt like acid in my chest. Every phrase seared into me. Humiliated you. Doesn't deserve. Found out. What did they think I had done? I drifted aimlessly toward a dark alcove near the service doors. Sitting on a narrow bench meant more for utility than comfort. The cushions were worn and sagging, and it smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but I needed to be alone. I needed to pull myself together before I walked back into that room. Because whatever they thought they knew, they were wrong. I hadn't humiliated Darren. I had stood by him. Supported him. I thought we were a team. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Ava's voice replayed again in my head, more cutting with each loop. How long had this narrative been building? Had I been walking around for weeks, months even, completely unaware that the ground beneath me was cracking? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, not sure what I was looking for. Some clue, some thread I'd missed. Something to prove this wasn't all unraveling. And then I remembered that night. The nonprofit gala. Darren had left early, and I had stayed behind to help his coworker, Caleb, who had a little too much wine. I helped him into a cab. That was it. Could that be what they twisted into something sordid? It had to be. A cold rush ran down my spine. Did they think I cheated on Darren? With Caleb? That night was barely memorable, at least, until now. My hands trembled as I pulled up my Uber receipt. There it was. 10:47 p.m. drop-off at Caleb's apartment. Just like I remembered. Nothing more. I scrolled through my texts, and there it was, Caleb's message from the next morning. Thanks again for helping me. Hope it didn't cause problems. It hadn't. Until now. The pieces began to slide together like jagged shards. This was what they thought they found out. This was what had redefined me in Darren's mind. And he hadn't even asked. Not once. Ava's voice echoed again. She still doesn't know. And I wasn't going to sit silently in the shadows anymore. Back at table 14, I sank into my seat as if I were sinking into the floor itself. My limbs felt heavy, my mind even heavier. Harper was gone. The bench by the service doors felt like another world, but the words I'd overheard behind that curtain still echoed in my head, making everything blur around the edges. I reached for my phone, craving some form of connection, even if it was just a photo, a post, Something to tether me back to the reality I knew, the one where Darren and I were still a unit. I tapped open his Instagram. My heart already braced for impact, but I couldn't have prepared for what I saw. Gone. Every photo of us, vacations, dinners, holidays, even the candid one from our anniversary picnic where I'd laughed mid-bite, deleted. Completely erased. My profile tag vanished from his bio. I was no longer his wife online. Just Darren Holloway, family man. Driven. Loyal. Loyal. I almost laughed. My thumb hovered over the most recent post, a collage from the wedding morning, full of smiles and makeup brushes, champagne flutes, and satin robes. The caption read, "Only real ones here, no fakes this time." My stomach clenched. I clicked the comments, already feeling the sting. The top comment was from Elaine. "So proud of our real family." Below it, Ava chimed in, "Stronger without distractions." Distractions. That was me now? After everything? After every damn holiday I planned, every late-night talk with Ava when she was crying over Miles during their first breakup, every time I mediated between Darren and his mom when the tension ran too high, I was now just a distraction? I blinked hard, willing the tears to retreat. The music around me felt distant, like it was being played underwater. I scrolled down his feed, trying to find even one post that still had me in it. Nothing, not even from the gala night. It was like I'd been scrubbed out of his life, one picture at a time. I checked Ava's page next. Hers was more curated, cleaner, sharper. The same morning of collage was there too. Same caption. Same digs. My name had never been mentioned, not once. Even in the stories, which I hadn't planned to watch, I saw flashes of Darren laughing with Miles and Ava, Elaine dabbing at her eyes during the ceremony. But no table shots. No casual pans that might show me tucked in the back corner like a misplaced guest. I was invisible. No, not invisible. Erased. And not just by accident. They'd done it with intention. With precision. A digital exorcism. Every post, every tag, every piece of evidence that I had ever belonged to this family, gone. I looked around at the reception again. No one saw the girl at table 14 clutching her phone like a lifeline, her world crumbling behind her forced, composed expression. No one saw her drowning in full view. I opened my own profile. I hadn't posted much recently, but I scrolled through anyway, wondering how it must look to someone on the outside. We still looked like a couple. Married. Real. I debated deleting it all, stripping away every trace like Darren had done. But something in me resisted. Not because I wanted to cling to the illusion, but because I needed the truth. I needed the record. I needed proof that I had existed in this marriage. That I had been here. I flipped back to Darren's profile. Refreshed. Still gone. He had done it deliberately. Ava and Elaine were just the chorus. He was the one who'd made the cuts. And still, I had no idea how we got here. How he went from holding my hand in movie theaters and whispering, "You're my peace," into my hair during hard nights to believing whatever poison had been dripped into his ear. How he let them turn me into the villain in a story I hadn't even written. My fingers hovered over the message button. I could ask him. Demand answers. Confront him in the middle of his curated party. But I didn't. Not yet. I'd already seen his silence. Already witnessed the way he looked right through me, like I was just a guest who wandered into the wrong celebration. No, not now. Not like this. Instead, I opened my Photos app. I pulled up the Uber receipt again, took a screenshot. I pulled up Caleb's message. Screenshot. Then I started a folder. I named it Truth. It was small now. Just 2 images. But it was something. My version of events. My voice. My receipt that I hadn't imagined the love. That I hadn't deserved this exile. I stared down at my phone, at the folder titled Truth, and felt something settle inside me. Not peace. Not yet. But clarity. They might have erased me online. But I knew who I was. And I wasn't finished. I sat alone in the dim glow of the reception hall, the celebration continuing around me like a show I no longer belonged to. Music pulsed through the air, Laughter spiked like champagne bubbles, and I remained rooted at table 14, my phone screen now black in my hand, the reflection of my own face faint and unfamiliar. I'd been erased online, exiled in person, and labeled a distraction by the people who used to call me family. The words from Ava, Elaine, even Darren, buzzed like gnats in my ears. Let her stay in the corner. She humiliated you. She still doesn't know we found out. But what exactly had they found out? I turned the question over and over, combing through the months behind me. At first, I thought maybe I had missed some crucial moment, some real mistake I hadn't realized I'd made. But as I thought harder, I kept coming back to one thing: the gala. The nonprofit event Darren's company hosted last November, held in that upscale hotel with terrible parking and even worse lighting. He had left early that night, tired, promising he'd meet me at home. I'd stayed, socialized a bit, and then spent the last part of the night helping Caleb, his tipsy coworker, into a cab. That had to be it. The only thing even remotely scandalous, though nothing had happened. Nothing. Just a good deed done in an expensive dress under flickering lights. But if someone had twisted that moment, turned it into something darker, and whispered it into Darren's ear, that could explain it all. I unlocked my phone and scrolled back through my photo archive, tapping into November. The event photos still lived there, a few selfies, a blurry shot of the banquet table, one of Caleb mid-laugh with a glass raised. The Uber receipt. 10:47 p.m., pickup from the hotel. Drop off at his apartment building. I could still picture his grateful, slurred thanks before he climbed into the back seat. I remembered calling out to the driver, asking him to make sure Caleb got inside. Then I'd gone home alone. I had even texted Darren that I was on my way. He hadn't responded until the next morning. I hadn't thought much of it then. And then, buried in my inbox, I found it, Caleb's message. Thanks again for helping me. Hope it didn't cause problems. The timestamp was 8:12 a.m. the next day. At the time, I'd read it, smiled at the kindness, and moved on. But now, in the light of everything else, the wording chilled me. Hope it didn't cause problems. Had someone seen me helping him and made assumptions? Had someone snapped a photo or spread a rumor that mutated into something monstrous by the time it reached Darren's ears? I saved the message, screenshot it, then opened the truth folder I'd started earlier and added both the Uber receipt and Caleb's text. Each piece felt like a small stone added to a foundation I could stand on. Proof that I hadn't done anything wrong. That the story they told themselves was fiction. Malicious, deliberate fiction. I rested the phone in my lap and looked around. The reception was thinning slightly now. The older guests were saying their goodbyes. The DJ had shifted into those end-of-the-night tracks, nostalgic and soft, like the echo of a party winding down. I spotted Darren across the room, standing beside Ava and Miles, his hand resting on the back of a chair, smile worn but present. He looked fine, unbothered. Like nothing was unraveling, like he hadn't ghosted me all night, erased me from his social media, sat silently while his sister and mother cast me out with words sharp as glass. I used to think he'd never believe the worst of me. That, even in our worst fights, he'd pause, look me in the eyes, and ask for my truth. But he hadn't. He'd taken someone else's story as gospel and judged me from a distance, punishing me with silence and absence. I thought of how quiet our house had been lately. The way he came home later and later. The way he barely responded when I asked if something was wrong. Maybe this had been brewing since then. Maybe that night at the gala had been the tipping point, and he had already decided who I was without asking me a single question. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the heaviness behind my ribs. There was grief in that realization. Deep, unexpected grief. Because it meant that our love hadn't been rooted in trust, not really. Because if it had, one false rumor couldn't have broken it so easily. My eyes snapped open again. I wouldn't let this narrative continue unchecked. I wouldn't let whispers and half-truths and digital erasure define my worth. I knew what I had done and what I hadn't. I picked up my phone again and opened Caleb's contact. My finger hovered over the call button. I wasn't sure what I'd even say. But maybe hearing his voice, even for a moment, would remind me that someone else out there remembered that night clearly and could tell the truth, too. Someone else might still stand on my side. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I typed a message. Hey Caleb. Just wanted to ask, do you remember anything unusual about the night of the gala? Just trying to clear something up. I hit send. Then I sat back in my chair and exhaled. The noise around me didn't feel so suffocating now. I wasn't sure where this was all heading. But at least I was beginning to reclaim the narrative. One fact at a time. One memory they couldn't twist. One truth they couldn't erase. And I was just getting started. The message from Caleb went unanswered for hours. I checked my phone over and over during the long, hollow evening after the reception, sitting alone in our quiet living room, the painting for Ava still propped in the corner like a monument to something that never was. Darren didn't come home that night. No call, no message, not even a flimsy excuse. I could have assumed he stayed at his parents' house, or maybe with someone else entirely. But I was too numb to imagine it. Too exhausted to chase the what-ifs that had already robbed me of sleep for weeks. When I woke the next morning, still curled on the couch under a throw blanket, sunlight slicing across the floor like sharp edges, I saw the notification. Not from Caleb. From someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Jalen, Darren's friend from college. His old roommate. The one who used to come over every other weekend back when we were newly married, always bringing some ridiculous board game or bottle of wine, staying late and telling stories that made Darren laugh like a boy again. He was also the one Darren had slowly drifted away from when Ava and Elaine began drawing firmer lines between family and outsiders. The preview of the message glowed on the lock screen. Leah, I need to say something. I should have said it earlier. My heart jumped, thudding hard in my chest. I unlocked my phone with shaking fingers and opened the full message. Jalen, hey Leah. I showed Darren the hotel footage. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm so sorry. It's falling apart over here. I stared at the words, rereading them until they burned into my eyes. My hands trembled. I had to sit down. Hotel footage. Footage. That meant there was something, some kind of video that had captured what happened at the gala. Or, more importantly, what didn't happen. Jalen had seen it. He had shown it to Darren. My mind raced. Did that mean Darren knew now? Knew the truth? And if he did, what was he doing about it? Sitting in silence again? Waiting for someone else to explain what he never had the courage to ask? I replied immediately. Me? What do you mean falling apart? What happened after you showed him the video? A few minutes passed before the typing bubble appeared. Jalen, he flipped out. First at me for not showing it sooner. Then at Ava and Elaine. There was a fight. Like a serious one. Elaine left the room. Ava told him she was protecting him from embarrassment. He's been pacing ever since, saying he doesn't know what's real anymore. I let the words sink in, but the ache in my chest didn't ease. Because here it was, confirmation that I hadn't done anything wrong, that the rumors were false, and that Darren had finally seen the truth. And yet I still sat in silence. Alone. No apology from Darren. No call. No knock on the door. Not even a text asking how I was. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. It wasn't just the lie that broke us, it was his willingness to believe it without question. His readiness to throw me aside like a mistake, to let his family erase me, bury me under false narratives, and watch from the head table while I disappeared into the background. Jalen messaged again. Jalen, I don't know what he'll do next. But I had to tell you. You deserved better than this. I should have said something when I saw how they treated you at the wedding. Me, thank you. For telling me. For showing him. There was a long pause, and then another message appeared. Jalen, whatever you decide to do now, I just hope you put yourself first. You deserve peace. I stared at that last line for a long time. You deserve peace. It had been so long since I even thought about what I deserved. I'd been so focused on surviving the coldness, the gaslighting silence, the subtle rejection that felt like 1,000 tiny cuts. I forgot that I had a right to joy, to safety, to love that didn't come with suspicion and strings. The truth was out now, but it didn't undo the harm. It didn't undo the looks Elaine gave me, the way Ava whispered behind curtains, the distance Darren kept even as I drowned right in front of him. He saw the proof. And still he hadn't come to me. That said everything. I pulled up my Truth folder and added a new screenshot, Jalen's message, timestamp and all. I stared at the digital trail, each image like a puzzle piece laid out on a table. Uber receipt. Caleb's message. Jalen's confession. The timeline was clear. I had nothing to hide. I never did. And Darren knew that now. But so did I. I set my phone down, stood up, and walked to the corner where the painting rested. I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen table. The park bench I'd painted, where Miles had proposed to Ava, looked softer than I remembered. Serene. Like the kind of place someone might go when they needed to think, to breathe, to begin again. I smiled, just barely. Let Ava keep her curated perfection. Let Elaine have her precious image of family. Let Darren wrestle with the ruins of the lie he helped build. I finally had the one thing they couldn't control anymore. The truth. And I wasn't going to wait for permission to move forward. I was folding laundry in the quiet stillness of the bedroom when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Darren's name. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail like he had let me go unanswered for weeks. But my hands paused over a t-shirt, one of his, the old gray one I used to steal and sleep in on hard days, and something in me knew I had to hear his voice. Just once. Just to know what he would say, now that there was nothing left to deny. I pressed the answer button, lifted the phone to my ear, and said nothing. Leah? His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. I listened to the silence that followed, heavy and uneven, like he was waiting to exhale. I saw it, he said finally. Jalen showed me everything. The footage. The receipt. The message from Caleb. You didn't do anything. You never did. Still, I said nothing. I let him sit in the truth the way I had sat in the lie. I believed them, he went on, his voice shaking now. I let them twist everything. I don't know what I thought. That you had lied to me. That you were someone else. And I didn't even ask. He stopped, breath hitching. I let them convince me. I didn't even come to you. I didn't ask. I just decided. I decided you weren't worth the benefit of the doubt. There it was. The confession. The thing I had begged for silently with every glance, every unanswered question, every night I spent wondering how someone who once held me with reverence could discard me so easily. I'm so sorry, he said. Leah, please. Come home. I felt that phrase, come home, settle over me like a dust sheet. I looked around our room, the laundry half folded, the suitcase already zipped in the corner. I had spent the morning packing, not because I needed to escape in a frenzy, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone to rescue me from a cage they helped build. Home, I echoed softly, not bitter, not cruel, just tired. Do you even know what that means anymore? Leah. No, I said, my voice firmer now. You didn't come looking for me. You didn't check. You didn't ask. You didn't knock on the door when I was being pushed further and further out of your life. You just let them convince you I wasn't worth fighting for. He was crying now. I could hear it. And it didn't move me the way it used to. I only noticed you were missing when the chair stayed empty, he whispered. At the reception, I kept looking over, expecting you to be next to me. And you weren't. And it hit me, I let them erase you. No, I corrected him gently, almost mournfully. You erased me. And you let them help. We'd done more than change a name. We'd rewired the entire foundation. The culture Dominic had quietly encouraged at the old firm, elitist, image-obsessed, transactional, was gone. I'd brought in consultants who specialized in restructuring from the inside out. Not just operations, but intention, language, values. We wrote a new mission statement that wasn't about winning for the sake of ego. It was about impact, integrity. Jordan and I had poured over every department. The hiring process was revamped, blind resume reviews introduced. We added mental health support as part of employee benefits and established pro bono hours as mandatory instead of optional. It wasn't radical. It was just overdue. We expanded our focus too. Tech startups led by underrepresented founders. Community organizations that needed legal counsel but had never been able to afford it. Innovation hubs with more passion than protection. These weren't just charity cases, they were investments in a future that didn't leave people behind. Tech once in, Jordan told me later that week, handing me a report. For different platforms have reached out. 2 want ongoing legal partnerships. 1 wants us to help develop ethical governance protocols. I scan the numbers, impressed but not surprised. They see the shift. They see the stability, he said. They know we're not just rebranding, we're redefining. Amira joined us in the conference room for a strategy session. She'd taken over as head of litigation, something I'd offered her the day after the final court hearing. She had the mind, the composure, and most importantly, the values. She didn't hesitate. I've reviewed the Langston and Rowe client transition files, she said, laying out folders. Half of their mid-level clients are jumping ship. A third have already reached out to us. I blinked, then laughed quietly. I didn't expect it that quickly. You didn't have to, she said. Dominic was the face of their elite brand. Once that fell apart, the rest followed. We decided to be selective. Not every client fit our new direction. Profit wasn't our only metric anymore. Jordan and I worked through each inquiry with care. If they didn't align with the values of Harper and Lynn, we passed. No regrets. No apologies. That afternoon, I walked the floor, checking in with teams, asking questions, listening. One of the younger associates, Samira, flagged me down near the espresso station. Miss Harper, she said, nervous but determined, I just wanted to say thank you. This place feels different now. Like I actually matter here. I smiled. You do. That's the point. After she walked off, I lingered. That was the win for me. Not headlines or contracts or capital. But that moment, knowing that someone felt seen, heard, valuable. That was the empire I wanted to build. Later, in my office, I reviewed our quarterly goals. Expansion into clean energy startups. A proposal to support displaced entrepreneurs in underserved communities. A partnership with a local nonprofit that offered legal literacy to single parents navigating custody and housing issues. The old firm wouldn't have looked twice at any of it. Too niche, too low profile, too charitable. But to me, this was power, real power. The kind that didn't rely on fear or ego, but on intention and impact. As dusk settled over the city, I stood at the window and looked out at the glowing skyline. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was reacting to someone else's moves. I wasn't defending or dodging or recovering. I was choosing. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely new book. And I was writing it with people I trusted, on principles I believed in. Dominic had once told me I didn't have the edge to lead anything on my own. That I was too balanced to make the hard calls. What he never understood was that balance isn't a weakness. It's a weapon. And now, with Harper and Lynn rising, I finally had the space and the freedom to use it. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I usually walked into now. No marble columns. No polished wood paneling. Just beige walls, worn carpeting, and a flickering overhead light that buzzed like it had something to say. It was the kind of room most attorneys dreaded. Low-profile cases, tight margins, little recognition. But for me, this was exactly where I wanted to be. We were representing a single father named Marcus Rivera, a former mechanic laid off during a round of quiet company cuts. His ex had taken him to court over custody after he missed child support for 2 months. It was the kind of case that got overlooked, buried under the glossier headlines. But not by us. Not by Harper and Lynn. Marcus sat beside Amira at the defendant's table, his hands folded so tightly in his lap they looked almost painful. He wore a borrowed suit. His tie was crooked. His eyes kept flicking to the judge's bench like he was preparing himself to lose. I watched from the back of the room, anonymous. I didn't need to sit beside him to feel the weight of what this case meant. Not just to Marcus, but to the version of me that once believed justice only lived in penthouses and boardrooms. Amira stood and made her opening with the same steady grace I'd always admired. She didn't use theatrics. She used facts. She laid out Marcus's history, his attempt to renegotiate payments when he lost his job, the documentation of every effort he made to keep visitation consistent. She showed the court who he really was, not a man avoiding responsibility, but a father trying to survive a system stacked against him. The opposing counsel looked bored. He rattled off accusations with practiced detachment. Unpaid support, instability, a questionable living environment, as if Marcus's apartment made him less of a father. I watched Marcus lower his eyes, ashamed of a narrative that had nothing to do with the truth. But Amira never flinched. She dismantled every claim with receipts, landlord statements, school records. Her voice never raised, but by the end, it filled the room with something stronger than authority, belief. When the judge finally ruled in Marcus's favor, granting him joint custody and a payment restructure, his breath caught so sharply I thought he might forget to exhale. He stood, stunned, then looked over at Amira like she'd performed a miracle. She just smiled and nodded, gently motioning him toward the hallway. I stayed seated as the room emptied. No applause. No cameras. No post-hearing interviews. Just a quiet victory, simple and clean. And somehow, that made it more powerful than anything I'd experienced in my own high-profile battles. When I stepped out into the hallway, Amira met my eyes. "He's crying in the lobby," she said softly. "Said he thought no one like us would ever fight for someone like him." I nodded, feeling something deep in my chest loosen. "That's why we're here." That night, I didn't post anything. No press releases. No firm-wide announcement. I just returned to my office, kicked off my heels, and sat by the window with the city lights flickering far below. There was something beautiful about winning in the quiet. About doing good without needing it to echo. For years, I'd been surrounded by people who believed power only mattered if people could see it. But now, I understood something they never did. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones no one claps for. And those are the ones that change everything. The lake was still, like a mirror stretched beneath the sky, broken only by the ripple of wind threading through the reeds. My cabin stood at the edge of the trees, tucked away from roads and voices, the porch worn from seasons past. I had come here with only a suitcase, a journal, and silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of memory, of breath, of peace. I sat on the wooden steps with a mug of tea cooling in my hands, wrapped in a sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar. It was morning, the air crisp and gentle. The birds weren't loud, just occasional bursts of song that felt like punctuation to the stillness. I hadn't checked my email in 2 days. My phone was off. The firm could run without me for a week. I had built it that way, intentionally. Because peace isn't found in control. It's found in knowing you don't have to hold everything all the time. I thought about him for the first time in weeks. Dominic. Not with bitterness and not with ache. Just reflection. Like watching a wave you've already drifted past. He had tried so hard to define me. With silence. With dismissal. With charm that curdled into control. I used to twist myself into smaller shapes to fit inside the spaces he allowed me. I used to make myself quieter so he could feel loud. I didn't even realize how heavy that kind of living was until I stepped outside it. I'd carried him in the folds of my decisions for years. Whether I was accommodating him, bracing against him, or strategizing around him, it was still a kind of tether. Even after I walked away from the marriage, I wasn't fully free. Not until the courtroom. Not until that last signature dried. And now, I didn't carry him at all. I took another sip of tea, the steam ghosting into the morning air, and looked out at the water. It reflected the sky so perfectly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. I hadn't cried when the divorce finalized. I didn't rage. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed. That breath, deep and uninterrupted, was worth more than any revenge. The world hadn't exploded. There was no cinematic moment. No applause. Just freedom that arrived so quietly I almost missed it. And in that stillness, I realized something. Healing doesn't always come with a climax. Sometimes it comes like this, slow mornings, warm tea, and the realization that no one is standing over your shoulder anymore. I opened my journal, flipping to the last entry I'd written the night I arrived. I am no longer reacting. I am choosing. That's the difference between survival and living. Today, I wrote simply, I am not angry. I'm just done. And it wasn't a resignation. It was clarity. I wasn't angry that Dominic had underestimated me. I wasn't angry that he tried to destroy me financially, legally, emotionally. He did what people like him always do when they lose control. They lash out. He believed I would break because that's the story men like him always tell themselves about women like me. But I didn't break. I recalibrated. I rebuilt. I rose. Not with noise. Not with fire. But with grace sharpened by boundaries. And now I was here, at the edge of the lake, at the edge of an old life, finally, truly alone in the best way possible. Later, I'd take a walk through the woods. Maybe I'd cook something simple. Read. Sleep early. No meetings. No strategies. No damage control. Just space. Dominic, wherever he was now, didn't matter. I didn't Google him. I didn't wonder who he was dating, whether he found another lawyer to wrap around his ego. That chapter was closed, the ink dry, the book shelved. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was just someone I used to know. And that was the most powerful ending I could have written. Not revenge. Not ruin. Peace. Mine.